time to spend some time with one, the only Shayne Stanfield. It's time to sip on scripture.
You're really
Morning,
laying it on.
I enjoy you, brother. You know how much I enjoy your segment.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank
get
you
to
for having me.
point my left little pinky
put
out.
the pinky out there.
I really look forward to it, too. What's this segment called again?
A little sipping on scripture. And today, Monday of the 18th week of Ordinary Time, I ain't afraid of no ghost. You might recognize that as the chorus to a rather popular theme song written by Ray Parker Jr. for the 1984 comedy horror movie Ghostbusters, which is about a team of eccentric parapsychologists who started a ghost-catching company. You also might recall lyrics of this song as being somewhat of a catchy advertisement selling the Ghostbusters as being a one-call solution for various problems related to paranormal activity. And that chorus, I Ain't Afraid of No Ghosts, which repeats over and over again in this song, pretty much reflects how the Ghostbusters team was portrayed in the movie as being generally courageous. And this would be expected. It is quite reasonable to think that anyone that would purposely search for ghosts, for whatever reason, would need to be unafraid of ghosts for the most part. But I'm inclined to believe that relatively few people actually go around looking for ghosts, and that most people like myself would definitely want to avoid the creepy experience of having such a potentially frightening encounter. So when I read the gospel for today, which comes to us from the 14th chapter of Matthew, I'm not surprised by the reaction of the disciples when they first see Jesus walking on the water during the fourth watch of the night. Here they are in the boat in the midst of stormy weather at a time of around something like 3 a.m., and we read, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. In fact, this story appears in 3 of the 4 Gospels, and we also see a similar detail of just how frightened the disciples became at this extraordinarily strange sight in both the 6th chapter of Mark and the 6th chapter of John. We need to keep in mind that while the story narrates the fact that Jesus was walking on the water near the boat, what was first seen of this by the disciples was anything but something that could have been recognized as Jesus. Again, they're struggling in a boat in the midst of stormy weather around the time of 3 a.m. Those are sea conditions with only the faintest ambient light, so Jesus would have easily appeared as some shadowy figure hovering above the waves. It's no wonder that they would have attributed the sight to some sort of ghost or apparition, because there wouldn't have been in their minds any other logical explanation. And such an appearance would have been a very real possibility in their worldview, just based on the earliest Jewish understandings of somewhat of a shadowy existence of the dead and a rather obscure realm of a Sheol. Of course, they also had writings, such as those found in Daniel, Maccabees, and Wisdom, that discussed some sort of personal existence after death. But perhaps most clear was that they would have known from the first book of Samuel. It's there that we read a fairly detailed account of Saul, who visited the medium at Endor, seeking a forbidden consultation with the dead. He asked her to conjure the spirit of Samuel, and an apparition then appeared that even spoke to Saul. So in the minds of the disciples, not only is this a possibility of a ghost or apparition, it's a spiritual reality, but so is the possibility that they can also speak, which brings me to my next point. This story in all 3 Gospels points to the fact that the disciples continued in fear that they were seeing a ghost until Jesus finally spoke up to address their fear by saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." From this, to me, they must have recognized his voice before they could have recognized his face. But we also have an interesting detail in today's reading from Matthew that is not included in the other Gospels. Here we read that Peter replies to Jesus by saying, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And I know there are a lot of commentaries out there about why Peter did this, but what if Peter simply didn't trust what he heard? If Peter could not yet see the face of Jesus apart from a shadowy ghost-like figure, and that ghost-like figure now speaks much like that apparition at Endor, don't you think that leaves reasonable room for suspicion on Peter's part? It's quite possible that Peter did not fully recognize the voice of Jesus to accept that the shadowy ghost-like figure really was Jesus, when all the evidence in his mind was pointing to a legitimate ghost, and possibly a deceptive evil one at that. So Peter's response then seems fitting. Dare I say he really needed to do a little Ghostbusters for himself by eliminating even the idea of any ghost, and so he did. Obviously not with Spengler's proton pack, but with the simple truth. Peter would have known that only the God of the universe with such power over the waters and that God alone would be able to give him some of that power to walk on the water for himself, to ease his troubled mind. So then we read that Jesus responded to Peter's test by simply saying, "Come." And Peter then got out of the boat and began to walk on the water towards Jesus. But it was soon after this that Peter began to lose his Ghostbuster courage. Peter may have been able to sing, "I ain't afraid of no ghost," at least for a moment, but he was now afraid once again. This time he feared the storm was just too much for his newfound courage to handle, so he began to sink. Such is the case for any of us when we begin to lose trust in the mighty grace of courage that Jesus provides. And we lose that trust by shifting our attention further away from Jesus as we focus more and more on all those problems around us. That's when concerns about all those problems begin to grow into fears, and that eventually gets the best of us. And that's when we too begin to sink. And at that point, who are you going to call? Well, sorry, movie fans, but Peter didn't say Ghostbusters. He said, "Lord, save me," and he was rescued by Jesus.
I love it. And you think, well, maybe the fear of that diminished over time. Well, I think St. John Paul II, when he was elected Pope and he came out with his first exhortation for us as he was named to this position, October 16, 1970, 11 times he said, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. This is not, the ghosts aren't going to get you. You know, there's an answer to all that ails you, all the evil that's around you. And Jesus is that.
Yeah.
And of course, we're all going to get slimed at some point. You know, we're going to get hit.
That's right.
And we just have to have trust and faith.
Yeah. And whatever you do, don't think of the Marshmallow Man. Just forget the Marshmallow Man.
Well, you know, when I was putting this together, you know, of course, this theme of Ghostbusters popped up, and I thought I got to do something with it. So I was trying to weave that in as much as possible. But I got to thinking, you know, obviously Ghostbusters is fiction, but I brought up a point here that folks need to understand. Ghosts are real. I mean, these things happen, and God allows them to happen for various reasons. And again, it's scripturally based. We can go back into Scripture and we can find events like this that we wouldn't say are unexplained. They're perfectly explained. But think about this. Most of us go through life without seeing a ghost. Most of us go. I mean, we could be creeped out by some certain things, but rarely does anybody really see a ghost. And the fact that they exist and they're out there and yet they don't bother us should give us some courage. You know, we can take that not with a grain of salt, but with some grace that we're cooperating by things. And who knows? I mean, if we're generally fearful of these things and we go through our lives, you know, getting freaked out about even the smallest of things, you know, maybe God would allow something to happen. Who knows? But you know, all of that stuff is working for our good. Yeah. And we need to appreciate the fact that we can have fear even over the things that go bump in the night.
Well, and you know, if you've read my book, Faith Over Fear: Lessons from My Life with Mother Angelica, I did. I had an encounter.
You plug in a book?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But here's the thing: I had an encounter with a evil spirit, and here's the thing: we play with them.
Yeah.
You know, this is BC, before I met the Lord. And I would say is one of the things that really propelled me toward that relationship with the Lord was an encounter with his enemy. And as long as we see them that way and understand them, and then also understand that we are told that he who is in us, the Spirit of God, is greater than he who is in the world, stronger than he who is in the world. I fear nothing. That's why it's faith over fear. You know, you have those encounters that builds fear, but when you encounter the one who has the strength to overcome all that and has overcome all of that, then you have confidence, just as you said, as Peter did. You know what? Pull me out into the water. I want to walk to you so that I can know that you're not a ghost. And then you can look at the apostles and say they still weren't. Jesus had to further convince them. After his resurrection, he fixes the fish and then eats some to prove that he's not a ghost. He's got a body, you know. Look, I'm not a ghost, fellas. I keep saying this, but I'm not a ghost.
Which is another great point. Yeah. I mean, even Jesus himself says, you know, look, I'm not an apparition. You know, it's really me. Right. So, you know, he's affirming the fact that, you know, this sort of thing exists out there. But again, we can't go through life being scared.
No.
You know, you bring up a great point. You know, we need to focus, as I said at the closing of my reflection, we need to focus our attention on Jesus. And as long as we focus our attention on Jesus, that whole ghost thing becomes not an issue. I mean, we have reasonable courage that, that we're not going to be harmed by these things. Again, will God permit it at some point in our lives? Who knows? But the fact of the matter is we're going to be brought out of it for the better, for our good. And all things work to the good. And we just need to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And, of course, there are all kinds of folks who take things too far. Let's go looking for them.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go see if we can conjure some up and so forth. And then let's sell our services to rid, a haunted house, for example. So
dangerous stuff. And look, a lot of people treat them as toys. Ouija board. If you're doing that, get rid of it. Go confess your sin. But there are these invitations to these good ghosts and stop it.
And the church teaches us to avoid that. For good reason.
Get rid of all of that.
Yeah.
Now I feel guilty of all those years that I spent in childhood watching Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Yeah.
Without Spangler's
funny? I
proton
didn't think
pack.
about that.
Right?
That was my main disappointment. My parents never got me a proton pack. But okay.
They look fun.
I see a tear in your eye, Mr. Finn. Thank you,
terrible.
Mr. Shayne Stanfield, Mr. Shayne Finn. Put the two of you together.
Hey.
Thanks, Shane. God bless you, brother. That was fabulous.
bless you.
Sipping on Scripture. Also, a trip down memory lane with the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Who are you going to call?
Jesus. I'm going to call Jesus. I'm going to call priest. That's who I'm going to call.